Okay, hello everybody. My name is Karimi and I am the account manager here at Envision IT. I want to first start off by thanking you for joining us on the Extranet User Manager call. My full contact information is contained within this presentation. Well, we will be sending out this presentation along with the video recording at the end. Chat is open, so if you have any questions, please put them in chat and we will be monitoring and answering those questions throughout the call. I'm going to now pass it over to Peter Carson, who's the president here at Envision IT.
Thanks, Rob. My name is Peter Carson. I'm, as Rob mentioned, the president of Envision IT. I'm also a SharePoint MVP and a virtual technical specialist with Microsoft Canada. So, I mean, from a technical point of view, I get quite deep into the SharePoint world and into the Microsoft world. As Rob mentioned, my contact information, my blog site are up on the slide deck, and we'll be providing the slide deck after the session as well. By all means, have a look at that stuff. So I just want to start with a quick agenda of what we're going to be going over today. So I'm going to start with a bit of an overview of who Envision IT is. We're going to talk a bit about SharePoint. Now, I'm assuming most of you probably know SharePoint. That's why you're on this call. But more specifically, licensing around Extranet Scenarios. And then getting into what some of those various Extranet Scenarios are. What are some of the supporting products, particularly our Envision IT Extranet User Manager to help with that. Get into some case studies, and then we'll wrap it up with some Q&A. So as Rob mentioned, feel free to post your questions up to the Q&A area in the GoToWebinar. We've got staff that are going to be answering those questions as we're going, and we'll go from there. Okay, so to start with, let's just talk a bit about Envision IT. So there's really two sides to the business. There's a services side and a product side. We're primarily going to talk about the product side of the business today, but I want to give a little bit of background on the services first. So we're very focused on building SharePoint solutions. We've got a wide range of experience, particularly around web content management, building public websites, intranets, extranets, and working extensively with SharePoint. We've actually worked with SharePoint since the 2001 release. We've got 11 years experience with the product now, being able to do a lot of interesting things with that. And these are just some quick examples. We'll take some time a little later to go through some specific case studies around this, but these are some of the public websites that we have that we've built on top of both SharePoint 2007 and SharePoint 2010. As well as that, we've got a number of collaboration portals that we've built for various different organizations. We'll talk more about how those fit into an extranet type of scenario. Specific extranets, either for a public site with the members area, a board of directors site, collaboration sites, multilingual. We've got French versions, we've got Dutch versions, a variety of different applications, as well as corporate internets, building publishing portals for organizations across Canada and around the world. I guess I should mention a bit more background on Envision IT. We're actually based in Mississauga, Ontario, Canada, which is kind of the central area of Canada. We're quite close to where Microsoft Canada offices are, but we work with organizations all around the world. On the product side of the business, as we've been building these implementations for various different clients, we've seen gaps in the SharePoint products, and we've filled that with our own products. We've got a number of different ones that we're going to go through. We're going to spend most of the time on our Extranet User Manager for SharePoint. This is really about two main things. So the identity management of people outside of your organization. So if you've got clients, partners, customers, vendors that you want to collaborate, communicate with, how do you manage the identity of those people? So that's one of the main purposes of that. And the other is the end user part of authenticating and interacting with your site. How do people log in? How do they retrieve their forgotten password? That side of things. Some of our other products, just for reference, we're actually going to be doing some webinars over the next couple of weeks on these, so look out for invitations on that. One is an image rotator. This is a web part for rotating banners. So if you've got a rotating homepage banner, say, you want it to look great not only on traditional devices, but mobile and iPad, it's a very easy web part to implement, and it's easy for the content authors to update the content in there. And that's really the mantra for most of our products, is we want to provide an easy experience to empower the business owners and the content authors to manage it and have a great user experience for the end users. Another is our photo viewer product. This is all about creating photo galleries from an online point of view that, again, are very rich and interactive for people to navigate and browse through, and also easy for the content authors to put content up into that. Custom 404s, This is all about how do you deal with broken links on your pages if people mistype URLs, or you've reorganized your site and you've got links from external sites that no longer work. How do you bring those through and across? So this is a very easy add-in for SharePoint that deals with those, allows the content author to manage a list of links and rules around how it should deal with those. So I want to take a minute, as I mentioned, and talk a bit about the various different versions of SharePoint and how do those fit together. So if we look at the base level, starting kind of in the middle of the screen here, we've got SharePoint Foundation. So this is a fully functional version of SharePoint. It's really targeted more to collaboration. So if you've got a team site that you want to share out, you can actually do that on Foundations. And our products that we're going to be talking about will work equally well with either SharePoint Foundations or the full SharePoint server. SharePoint Designer is a freely available add-on that allows you to manage the content and the look and feel of those sites. And so those are both basically, I don't like to call them free products because you do need to be licensed for Windows Server to use Foundation. That's something to be aware of, but it is very cost-effective to license that. As you move up into the full SharePoint Server product, though, there's two flavors to that. There's a standard and an enterprise. And if you're familiar with the client access licensing or the CALs that you buy for your SharePoint to be used internally, the For Internet Sites model is similar to that in terms of the functionality that it delivers. There's both a standard and an enterprise, but instead of buying these for individual users, as you do with a CAL, you're actually buying them for the servers. So if you have a one server farm, you would buy one of these FIS licenses. They're often referred to either as a standard or enterprise version. Or if you had multiple servers, you buy multiple licenses for those. You still need to individually license your internal users using regular CALs, but now you can bring in as many extranet users as you want, all under that one license. So if we look at the different flavors of that, if we start with the FIS standard license, so this gives you all the same features that you would get in a standard CAL. So you've got the ECM features, you've got all the web publishing and workflows, social networking, very rich search engine. It's a single license, as I mentioned, for each server. Now it is for a single domain license. So if you think about our site at www.envisionit.com, we can host that on a FIS license, and we can bring up say a blog.envisionit.com. It's still on the same domain. It's still on envisionit.com. I can use a single license for that. If I have completely different top-level URLs for my sites that I have on my farm, that's one of the things that causes me to move to the enterprise CAL. It is required for you to do multi-domain licensing. But it also lights up all the additional enterprise features. So you've got the standard features in there, but you also get things like InfoPath forum services, all the performance point and BI features, access and Visio services, fast search. If you want to light up the full fast search experience, you can do that under that license as well. You know, and for those of you that aren't familiar with FAST, this was an acquisition that Microsoft did a number of years ago now, where they bought FAST. They were really the market leader from an enterprise search point of view. They've now integrated a lot of that functionality into SharePoint 2010, but there is still a separate fast search server for internet sites that can be used with SharePoint as well. So if you want that full fast experience, you can do that there as well. And that's basically licensed with the same FIS enterprise license you would use for SharePoint. So before we move on from there, I just want to get a sense from people in terms of what they're currently using today. So I'm going to open up a poll here in terms of what version of SharePoint are you currently using. I'm going to keep that open for about a minute now. I just want to get a sense of, are people running already on SharePoint Server 2010? Who's using Foundations? Who's still on MOS 2007? Or you may be on Windows SharePoint Services 3.0, which is the previous sort of free version of SharePoint in the 2007 release. So we're about 25 seconds into that right now. Most people, I'll share these results up when we're done, are leaning towards SharePoint Server 2010. That's about 2/3. And then the next biggest behind that is MOS 2007. That's not surprising. I mean, we're well into the 2010 life cycle. It's been out for 2 years now. Great step forward from 2007. Just while we're waiting for that to close out, I mean, everything that I'm going to be showing you today will work on 2007. There's just certain user functionality that isn't quite as rich from a 2007 point of view. And I'll try and remember to call that out where appropriate through there. Okay, so let me close that out. And I just want to share So you can see we've got 68% on SharePoint Server 2010, about 20% on MOS 2007, and a little bit on both Foundations and WSS 3.0. Okay. So let me come back to my slides, and what I'd like to do now is take you through a couple of different extranet scenarios. So let's start just by defining what an extranet is. So it's a website that's going to connect your organization to, even to your employees, to your partners, your vendors, your customers, any stakeholders inside of your organization. And it's a place to provide that secure, engaging, personalized interaction. You know, how do you collaborate with people other than emailing things back and forth? And email really isn't a great document management system, although a lot of people use it that way. That's really what SharePoint is all about. So rather than just using it internally within your organization, how do you expose that out externally? And why would you want to do that? What are some of the business goals around building an extranet? Well, certainly, you know, supply chain inefficiencies. If you think about all those emails with contracts and POs and invoices and things flying back and forth, if you can manage that in a better way, in an online way, that's certainly going to help out from an efficiency perspective. It's going to help build loyalty from the customer base. People are expecting it today, that they can create an online profile with your organization and that they can interact with you 7/24. You know, from a self-service point of view, yeah, people still like to talk to somebody on the phone, but if it's middle of the night or off hours, what have you, you know, being able to get in, get the information that you need and self-serve that is very important. You know, sharing business resources, even mobile and remote employee access. They can leverage the same things that you do from an extranet point of view, just from a remote staff perspective. So very valuable from that perspective. You know, this just goes into some more detail in terms of the competitive advantage around that. You know, how do you set yourself apart from your competitors? The company that's easiest to do business with is often the one that most people will choose to do business with. It's not just about being the cheapest. It's about being effective and being easy to work with. You know, so sharing that information back and forth is a big benefit from that perspective. Obviously, cost reduction, just dealing with inefficiencies and support costs. You know, if you can push people to a self-service model, not only are they often happier, but it obviously costs you less to do that. So that's a good thing. And then from a business growth point of view, you know, you just think about how do you scale your organization. If you're in a rapid growth mode, self-service is obviously a lot easier to scale that out than trying to build a call center and build capability with people to deliver that. So lots of benefits from that perspective. So let's talk now about different extranet scenarios. So there's four main ones that we're going to cover off here. We've got collaboration or publishing portals, an internet website, board of directors portal, and some complex scenarios that I'll talk about in a second. So the first one, collaboration and publishing portals, this is really about you've got a private area, you know, let's say a team site where you just want to collaborate with external parties, or you've got a publishing area where you just need to distribute information out. You know, there's manuals or secure documents, things that you don't want to put on a public website, but you want to publish out to that private audience. That's what this first scenario is really about. The second scenario is taking that and merging that with a public website. So maybe you've made the decision to actually host your public website on SharePoint 2010. Strongly encourage it. We host our own site on SharePoint 2010. We've helped lots of organizations do that. It's a great platform from a web content management point of view. And one of the beauties of SharePoint is this idea that it scales from the individual to the enterprise. So if you think about your My Site as your personal site in SharePoint, up through your team sites internally, out to your public website, and then continuing on into members only or customer portals on the public site, you know, that's very rich from that point of view. Typically, you want to have a very good forms-based login experience. You don't want the gray browser challenge prompt coming up. You want a nice experience for people coming in. This is your public website. Branding is very important. Self-registration is often a common element there as well. What sort of approvals need to happen with that before people can come into the site? So those are the sorts of things that we'll talk about when we're looking at public websites with an extranet coupled in with that. The third one, the board of directors portal, this is a bit of an anomaly in terms of what the audience typically looks like. You know, many extranets are for large numbers of hundreds, thousands, even 10,000s of users on there. But board of directors portals tend to typically be fairly small sets. You might only have a dozen people that are coming into that portal. Maybe you don't need to set up a whole separate repository, and we'll talk about where the users live in a minute. These could actually just live in your corporate domain. They're highly trusted people. but they need an easy way to come in, just an SSL site that they go to, they put their credentials in, and they're now in the Board of Directors portal. Often, whether you're talking about corporate or public sector or not-for-profit boards, the demographics may be that people just aren't as technology comfortable as you'd like. You got to make this easy and simple for them to use, so they're just not going to adopt that. And then the complex collaboration scenario, this really aligns with the enterprise CAL with SharePoint if you're doing some of the things that feature into that. So you're building InfoPath forms, so online electronic forms. Maybe you want to light up some of the business intelligence, Excel services, Performance Point, Power Pivot, access and video services, the fast search for SharePoint. Most of these things on here, and we'll talk a bit more about the authentication in a second, don't work well in claims-based, which is how our login form works. So that's where we bring in other supporting products like Forefront Threat Management Gateway, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. So that's really a differentiator in terms of the types of workloads and things that you're going to be doing on the site and what authentication mechanism you need to have to support that. So let's talk about supporting products. So the first one is our Extranet User Manager product. So we've created this, as I mentioned, really to deal with the challenges of identity management and authentication of those external users. You can do forms-based authentication in SharePoint out of the box. I'm not sure how many of you have done that. We should actually put that up as a poll question. It's ugly to get it working, and it's actually ugly from a user experience point of view. No fault to, don't want to slam Microsoft too much. They've done an awesome job on SharePoint. That particular area is a gap that we see, and that's hence the reason for this product. We're filling that gap. Likewise, for an identity management perspective, often IT takes ownership of that, and they end up managing those external identities. We don't want that. We want the business to actually manage that themselves. So let's just get some terminology together in terms of the different categories of users that we're going to be talking about. So if we start on the left here, we've got our internal users. So obviously this is a collaboration site. It's not just about giving access to the external users. Your internal users have to access it too. Then we've got what we call the managed AD users. So if we decided we're going to use Active Directory as the underlying provider, these are the managed AD accounts that you want to delegate it to the business and let them manage those users. Or likewise, they may be managed SQL users. We'll talk about how you can use either Active Directory or SQL as a repository under the hood. Or they could actually be federated users. So maybe you've set up a trust relationship with one of your organizations using, for example, Active Directory Federation Services. You can actually create an external trust to another organization and let them authenticate on their own site. So that's what's an example of a federated user. That could be more casual as well. It could be a LinkedIn or a Facebook ID. There's lots of different systems you can federate with through there. So here's a simplistic view of what a SharePoint extranet could look like. So we've got a DMZ in the center with our SharePoint farm installed in the DMZ. We typically have a separate Active Directory that's not part of our corporate domain in the DMZ just to manage the service accounts and the operation of the SharePoint farm. We may have a SQL repository there. We're certainly going to have one to run SharePoint, but we may also use that from a user credential storage point of view as well. We've got our internal corporate AD on the left here, where your staff have their accounts. And we may have a trusted Active Directory from a federated mode in a partner organization outside of our environment altogether. So if we think about the users, so starting with the internal users, so they're working inside your corporate firewall, they're at their desk within your physical building, and they're hitting that SharePoint site. So typically when they hit it, it's going to use their Windows credentials, and it's going to try and authenticate them down to the DMZ Active Directory. Now they're not in that AD. You don't want to go down the route of creating second accounts in the DMZ for all of your staff. That just becomes a management nightmare for everybody. So you want to set up a one-way trust and let them authenticate using their regular corporate AD credentials. Sometimes that's the challenge because there's a fair bit of work you need to do on the firewall to light up those trusts. And even though it is a one-way trust, which means that they don't have any rights on your internal network, it's just allowing your internal users to have rights in the DMZ, still some security folks don't like doing that. So one of the things we do in our product is we allow those internal users to come in. We auto-detect that they're an internal user, and we actually just authenticate straight to the internal ID. So you actually don't need that one-way trust. All you have to do is open up LDAP port 389 in your firewall to say, let these LDAP queries come through from our DMZ against our AD. you're not actually updating anything in that AD. You're providing a restricted read-only view so that those users can be authenticated. Now, if some of your staff happen to be working outside your corporate firewall, they're telecommuting from home, they're working on a client site, whatever the case may be, you want them to come into that exact same site, the exact same URL. Now, they will have to log in because they're not inside your network, but you do want them to log in again with their corporate AD credentials. You don't want a second username and password for those people. Now, let's say we have our managed AD users. They're coming into the site. They're just going to authenticate right down to that DMZ AD. We generally don't recommend that you put your external users in your internal Active Directory. There are some situations with certain clients where we've done that. We tend to at least segregate them into a separate organizational unit or separate them out somehow. But in general, we recommend using a separate AD that's its own forest inside the DMZ. If you don't want to set all that up, maybe you've got a very small single server farm and you don't actually need an Active Directory in the DMZ, you could use SQL instead. So when these users come in and authenticate, they're actually authenticating against a SQL repository. There is no Active Directory involved in there. And then the last case, when you've got federated users, when they hit SharePoint, they identify themselves as a federated user, and that actually kicks them back to their own AD or their own Facebook or LinkedIn or Live ID or whatever they're using from a federation point of view. They do the authentication there, and that passes a claim like a SAML token back over onto the SharePoint side and lets them in from there. It doesn't mean that everybody that can validate on that external party has access to your extranet. You still control the permissions. It's just the authentication that's happening externally. So let's talk a bit more about the main components of Extranet User Manager. So there's three main parts to it. There's an administration console, and I always question the use of the word administration because it is used by IT to administer and configure the product, but the idea is to delegate it to the business as well. Let them manage the users and groups themselves. And we'll show you in a minute. It's a very easy to use web interface for them to do that. Then we've got the end user components. So these are the things that your external parties are going to see. Your login page, do you have a legal disclaimer before you let into the site? How do they change their password? What do they do if they've forgotten their password? All those standard components that every extranet absolutely needs to have. And then the last section is registration. And not every site needs this, particularly though for public-facing sites that have a customer or a visitor portal on there. That's typically where we'll see a self-registration. So it allows users to self-register on your site, but typically there's some sort of an approval process around that. And just from a licensing point of view and the way we structure this, it's one license for the entire product set. For the registration component, though, we do give you the full source code for that. We know it's going to be customized heavily for your particular implementation, and we're going to show you some examples of what those look like. So let me take you through just a pictorial representation of what this looks like. So we've got a extranet user outside of our site on the left here, and we've got a business owner of a particular area of the extranet on the right-hand side. So a brand new extranet user comes in, hits the login page, they don't have an account on there. What do? Well, they click on the register here link, fill in all their profile information, submit that, and the system generates them a thank you email. Just thanks for registering on the site. We need to approve. We'll get back to you as soon as that approval has happened. At the same time, it also sends an email to the business owner saying, hey, just got a new person on your site. Check them out. Make sure they vet through properly. Whatever business processes you need to do, here's a link to all their user information. When you're happy with that, just change their status to active, and we'll generate a welcome email. So that welcome email goes over to the end user saying, hey, welcome to the extranet. Here's a link for you to set your password. So one of the things we don't want to do is actually send those passwords out in clear text. We don't want the business owners to know the external user's password. So what we do is we create a secure token. We put a link in the email. They click on that link, and it takes them down to an update password page. They choose their own password, whatever password length, complexity rules that you want to have in your underlying provider, set that password, and they can now come into the login page, and they now have access into SharePoint. So very hands-off. IT wasn't involved here at all. It was strictly an interaction between the external user and the business owner. They have their account. They're in SharePoint. They're collaborating. Everybody's happy. Wonderful. A couple months go by. The external user hasn't been in there for a while. They don't remember their credentials. Well, one of the key things that we do is we actually use their email address as their username. So that's one less thing for them to forget. But passwords are tough to manage. Everybody's got lots of passwords for lots of different sites. I don't know if you guys saw the news today about LinkedIn. You might want to be checking your passwords and updating your passwords on there because apparently there's some compromises going on in the news about that. But regardless, I come in, I need to get into your site, and I just don't remember my credentials anymore. So I click the Forgot Password link. I get to a Forgotten Password page. All I have to do is remember my email address that I registered with, type that in, and the system will send me a Forgotten Password email. And just like the welcome email, it's got a link on it. I click that link, I set my password, I'm into the site again. So again, not only was IT not involved, but the business wasn't involved either. There was a completely self-serve operation. It's very email-centric. So the person that's registering needs to have access to their email account in order to be able to gain access to the site, both initially and from a forgotten password point of view. So that helps to validate that people are who they say they are. So what I'd like to do now is kind of take you through that same scenario, but from a live demo point of view. So let me just pull my browser up over here. And the site that I have up on the screen, I'm just going to sign out here. No, it doesn't want to sign me out. Well, the top level site, that's why I'm not in the public area. Okay, that's better. So the top level site of this site is an anonymous site. You can actually go to it yourself. It's publicly available, https://productdemo.envision.it.com, and you'll get what I have up on the screen here. We then have a sub-site underneath that that's privately available. So you have to have an account before you can go into that site. Now this is just an out-of-the-box Microsoft SharePoint publishing site template. We haven't changed the look and feel or the branding or anything on here. This is what you get out of the box from Microsoft. So you can see I'm not currently signed in here. So I can either click that sign-in link to force the sign-in, or I can actually just say I want to access the private area. And as soon as I try and go to a secured area, it's going to force the authentication to happen automatically for me. Now remember, though, I'm running inside of our corporate network, so when I click on that access the private area, you'll notice it didn't actually bring up a login page for me. It just took me right in. It switched me from anonymous to signed in as Peter Carson using my corporate credentials, because that's the account that I'm logged on to my local computer with right now. So it just did a pass-through Windows authentication. And that's one of the key things, is you want it to be easy for people to come into the site internally for your staff and not have to authenticate again. Just a single sign-on experience. They've logged onto their workstation. They have access to the site. Now let's say I go back to that public area, and I now want to sign in as a different user. So this is the page that you would see if you were to go to the private area from the outside. It doesn't know who you are. Even if you are a staff member, it's not aware of that. So it wants to know my email and my password. Let's say I've never been to this site before. I need to register and create a new account. So I'll click on that Register Here link. I can put in my profile information. And as I mentioned, I'll show you later, this registration page is highly customizable. We only require the first and last name and the email address. You could define your own rules in terms of which fields you want to have on there and whether they're required or not. As a sample, we put some of the standard Active Directory fields in there. We also added things like a public profile and an e-newsletter, just as an example of a non-standard type of field you might want to put on your registration. And as I'll show you later, the branding, the look and feel, obviously is completely customizable. This particular version we've got available in both French and English, so we do support multilingual there too. So I'll go ahead and hit the Save Settings, get to a thank you page. Thanks for registering on our site. Then I should be getting a confirmation email, and then a second email once my account is being approved. And I need that second email to be able to set my password and go into the site. So let me bring up my email now. So you can see one's come through already. So this is the one to me as the person registering on the site, just saying, thanks for requesting an account. We got your information. Once your account's approved, you'll get a second email with your instructions to set your password. And you can set whatever expectations are reasonable in terms of how many business days it might take to go through that approval process, when people should expect to see that email coming through to them. So while the other one is coming, which is the approver one, I'm just going to come back to the site here. I'm actually going to come into the private area because we're going to need to get into the administration side of the console. So while we're waiting for that email, let me give you a quick tour around here. So we can see that we've got the ability to search and add both users and groups, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. And I can also configure the system through here as well. We have different security roles within this part of the product. I'm logged into the configuration editor, which lets me do all things. If I was just a group owner or a group editor, actually wouldn't see the configure section here. We security trim it just like you see in SharePoint. So you only see the things that are relevant to what you're able to do. Let's see if that other email's come through. There we go. So I've got a pending approval email now. Oh, wrong person. Looks like somebody's getting into the site already and setting up accounts. Very cool. Let me find the one for Peter Carson 3. There we go. So this is to the internal business owner saying, hey, here's a new user. You need to activate them. Click on this link to edit their record. So when I click that link, it takes me into that admin console that we were just in, and it opens up the record with all the registration information of the person that registered off of the site. And you'll see that their status is currently set to pending approval. So we have 3 different states, either active, deactivated, or pending approval. So I need to switch them to active in order to approve them. It's not until that happens that the underlying account actually gets created. So at this point here, we have our own SQL database that manages the operation of our application. If we have a record of that registered in that database, that's the only place they exist. As soon as I save this record with them in an active state, it's actually going to create the underlying AD account or create the appropriate record in the SQL membership provider database. I also need to decide what groups that I want to put them into. So these are not SharePoint groups. These are underlying provider groups. So in the case of Active Directory, this would be an actual AD group that I'm making them a member of. And I go ahead and say OK. So my changes have been saved. It's now generating the welcome email, and we'll see that coming through in a second to my inbox. There we go. Your new account. Welcome to the Envision IT Extranet. So you can see here I've got a link to set my password, and I've got until tomorrow at this time to set that. And that's fully configurable. You can decide how long you want these welcome emails to be valid for. So I simply click on that link, choose my new password, and away I go. Now again, as I mentioned, whatever password length and complexity rules you have, those will get surfaced up through the application as well. And actually, if I come back to that email, even though it expires tomorrow at 2:34, if I try clicking on that again, because I've used it, it's been immediately expired. So if somebody has access to that email after the fact, if I already set my password, that email is worthless. There's no value to it. The token is gone and finished. If the time went by and I didn't use it in time, I can always do the click here to reset your password, put in my email address, and it will actually send me a forgotten password email. Looks very much like the welcome email. Oh, I got more people registering. Cool. Just waiting for that forgotten password email to come through. But it'll have the same link in it to allow me to set my password. It's a very similar process. There we go. So now I can click this reset your password. Here you'll notice, though, we actually have a 2-hour expiry. So we put a much shorter time frame on the forgotten password. You can configure that independent of the welcome email timeout on there. So I click that link. Again, I could reset my password again. It hasn't actually done anything with my account when I requested that password email. It's not until I actually type in a new password that it actually updates anything. So I can abandon this process, come back to the top level of the site, and say I want to sign in as a different user. I'll go ahead and use that Carson 3 account that we just set up. And the password that I just set on it. And now I'm in as Peter Carson 3. So you can see, very easy. The end user was able to self-register on the site, create a pending approval account. A business owner, not somebody in IT, got the approval notice. They said, yep, that looks like a valid user. Set them to active. I get my welcome email as my extranet user, set my password, and I'm now into SharePoint. If I come back sometime later and I don't remember my credentials, I can use that forgotten password link just to request a new password, reset, get the email, set the password, I'm back in again. Very self-service, very easy, simple user experience from that point of view. What I'd like to do now, though, is switch back. I'm going to sign out and sign back in as my corporate user so that I can come into the admin console. I want to give you a better tour of what's inside here. So we saw the edit user, so I can come in and search users through this interface. I can say, well, let's look for that Carson 3. I don't have to type the whole thing in there. You can see I've done a bunch of demos on here, and I've got a bunch of deactivated users. Maybe I'm just interested in the active one. Let's do that search again. There's that one user. Away we go. And I can click on the link to edit the user, be the same screen that we saw previously for setting that user up. I can also come in here and say, well, what sites does this user have access to? So what this is doing is looking at the permissions in SharePoint and saying, well, where has this user been granted permissions? And you might say, well, you didn't actually grant any permissions to this individual user. But if you remember, when I activated them, I made them a member of a group. And that group already had permissions in SharePoint. So just by being a member of the group, they have rights to these 3 sites. And that's generally how we recommend managing the permissions, is always set up a group, set the permissions appropriately for that group, and then all you have to do is use our product to manage the users and their membership in the appropriate groups to do that from there. So let's come back to the home and talk about the groups themselves. So I can search groups just like I do users. We can see that demo users group that I created or that I'd made a person a member of, and I can manage the membership of that group. We can see there's lots of users in there. I could remove ones. I could add new members. But I can also add an owner to a group. And the idea is you can add either an internal corporate user or even an extranet user to be an owner of a group in the extranet itself, either as a user or a group themselves. And they then have the rights to manage the membership of the group itself. So if we think about the permissions model of our Extranet User Manager product, we have the configuration editors that could do all the IT administration. You want to change your SMTP server or the domains you're managing, system settings. That's all under that role. The group owner that I just touched on there, that gives you the ability to search, add, and edit users, but you can't actually change groups themselves. So you can set up a group for a business owner and say, I'm going to make you an owner of that group. They'll be able to manage the membership of it and manage all the users, but they won't be able to change the group itself or make net new groups. So the third role is called a group editor. That's a user that's able to add and edit groups themselves as well. Now, even as a group owner, though, I can bulk import too, so as well as just adding individual users by coming in here. So you don't have to have a self-registration. You could say, well, let's have the business create users through this interface. I can also import users through here. So I can download an Excel, pull that in. It'll go through a validation process, and it'll actually create all those accounts for me. You can even set the group membership through that process, and it'll send out all the welcome emails. So you could have 1,000 users that you want to set up on the extranet, and away you go from there. So let me finish off the demo with one more piece, which is coming back to the login process. I just touched on some of the things that we have in there, but I just want to call your attention to how that actually works. So if I come in and do a sign in as a different user, so you saw me automatically sign in because I was a corporate user and just passed my credentials right through. You saw me type in the pcarson3 at envisionit355, and that's not our normal email domain. If you want to email me, you want to get me at peter@envisionit.com. The other one is just a test demo account that I use. And the key here is that the product's being configured in this installation to say, if I see an envisionit.com email domain, that means that's a corporate user. So when I type in my password here, I'm actually typing in my corporate AD password. And what we do is, under the hood, we actually make that LDAP call to your corporate AD and say, is there a user that has the email address peter@envisionit.com? Give me the username, and I'm now going to log in as that user. So it makes it very easy. Even your staff themselves can use their email alias in order to log into the extranet from outside. You don't have to. You could say, I want to type in domain/username. It then understands that that's not an email address, that it's an Active Directory domain and username, and it'll log in fine from that. That domain could be your corp domain. For your corp users, they could do that, or it could be your extranet domain for your external users. So all those different ways you can log in, but it's all seamless and transparent. You know, if you've gone through the setup of the forms-based authentication in standard SharePoint, and you want to do that in mixed mode, the user experience honestly is awful, because the first thing users see when they come to your site is this dialog box that says you want to log in with Windows authentication or forms. And most people go, huh, I don't know what that means. So this is a much simpler, better user experience from that point of view. Okay, so let me flip back to my presentation. Before I just want to finish off on a couple of other products. So one of the things, if you're doing heavy collaboration on your site, you'd want to look at Forefront Protection 2010 for SharePoint. Let's really think about it as an antivirus for your SharePoint. So you've got external parties that are uploading and downloading documents from your team sites, you don't know what state their individual systems are in, whether those documents are infected. This really will enforce those scanning rules to make sure stuff is clean coming in through that. Also in the forefront family is Threat Management Gateway. So I mentioned some of those complex scenarios don't work well with our form-based login that I was just showing you. TMG is really the solution to that, to say, okay, we'll put a TMG server in front of SharePoint. It will handle the authentication. It really acts as a very smart application firewall as well as a single sign-on surface. You sign on once through TMG, and then when you get back to the SharePoint server, it already knows who you are, whether you're an extranet user or an internal user. You're coming in as a Windows user. Some of those other Microsoft technologies like SQL 2008 and the BI and Performance Point that aren't up to date with what Microsoft is doing from a claims point of view work well in this scenario. So we like to look at the workloads that you're going to be doing and make a recommendation on how best to sign into the site. UAG kind of takes it up another level from there. If you want to do endpoint or direct access or even multi-factor, things like RSA Secure ID tokens, this is where UAG starts to come into the mix. Again, still use our product from an identity management point of view, but use TMG or UAG from an authentication point of view. So before we get into the case studies, I want to do another poll. So let me pull this up here. So I just want to get a sense of when people are planning on launching an extranet. Maybe it's something that you've already implemented or something you immediately want to do, or it's a little further down the horizon. I'm going to give my voice a break for a minute here, grab a drink of water, let you guys vote against that, and we'll share that back with you. Very good. Thanks, everybody. So I'm just sharing those results out. Interesting, kind of bookended on either end. So about 40% of you have already implemented an extranet but looking to improve that, and 40% further out in the next year or so. So interesting mix there. Let me come back to the presentation here again. What I'd like to do, we've got about 15 minutes left. I want to take a little bit of time, take you through some case studies to give you a sense of what this could look like in different scenarios, and then open the floor up. We've had a number of great questions coming in. I know Rob and Wes have been busy answering those back to you. I just want to make sure we address those for the group as a whole. So from a case studies point of view, if you remember back to my scenarios that I started with, the first one was the collaboration or publishing portal idea. So let me talk to a couple of scenarios from that. If I bring my site back up again, probably the first one to start with is just our own extranet here at Envision IT. So as a services organization, we're building large projects for our clients on SharePoint. We need a way to manage all the documents and things related to that and collaborate with our clients on that. So obviously we use SharePoint to do that. We build client and project sites in our intranet/extranet. This is an example of one for the Heart and Stroke Foundation. So it has all the business documents, even invoices, quotes, specifications, project plans, mock-ups, stuff that they've given us, stuff that we're giving them. Everything about this client relationship is in this SharePoint site. So it's a great way to manage all that information. One of the things that we built for Heart and Stroke Foundation was their corporate intranet. So for the 250 people that work for the Ontario organization, it's their place to go from a communications portal point of view. And then Heart and Stroke came to us and said, well, look, we've got several thousand volunteers outside of our organization. There's a lot of great content on our ticker site, which is our intranet site, that we'd like to share out with those external volunteers. So we actually created a second site and basically had publishing rules on the main intranet that allowed content authors to decide which of those pieces of content they wanted to have on the extranet site. So this is a dev version of the extranet site. I'm logged in as myself here right now. Then come in and sign in as a different user. You can see that it bears a resemblance to the login page that I was showing you before, but as I mentioned, it's very important to provide the client branding as part of that experience. And from a registration point of view, it's a very simple registration. They're just getting some demographics information in there. We put the Google reCAPTCHA in, which is an option to ensure that people aren't spamming that. They go ahead and register, they get their account, and away they go. It's very open and inclusive from that point of view. A slightly different scenario from a publishing, Cadillac Fairview has been a big client for many years for us. We've done websites for their retail properties across Canada, their office properties. We have about 45 or 50 different individual public websites hosted on SharePoint 2007. And what we did was we built an extranet that allows the tenants of those properties to actually participate in the web content. So if I'm a merchant at the Toronto Eaton Centre, which is one of the flagship properties here in Toronto, Canada, I can create my own account. Once it gets approved, I can actually submit my own content. So maybe I'm a marketing person at McDonald's Canada, and we're running this $1 drink promotion. This content was actually created by somebody at McDonald's, not at Cadillac Fairview. They post that content up into the site. They say, I want to tag this for the Toronto Eaton Centre, or maybe they want to tag it at every mall across the country that they have a McDonald's in, and the content goes out, but it's not approved yet. The marketing managers on the Cadillac Fairview side then get the notices through the workflows, say, here's new content, it looks good, they approve it, and boom, it's up on the site. So a great way to literally get tens of thousands of tenants all contributing and working with you from a public website point of view. The second scenario that we talked about was more from a internet website members-only area. So one of our key case studies in Boys and Girls Clubs of Canada. Lots of great content. We'll send you the links in the presentation on what we've done with a fantastic organization. And one of the things we built was their public website. So if you go to www.bgccan.com, you'll see their public website. Tons of interesting content about the organization and how you could get engaged or donate or interact with them in there. But if I click on this members link here, again, I'll see a branded login experience. Again, looks similar because it is our login page. It's just got its unique branding master page and content on there. And again, when I click on the register link here, it looks very different than the registration page I saw you before. So they would come through here and fill in the appropriate information. They actually name their own approver. So if you know somebody who's already a member of the site, they'll get an email. As long as they can log into the site, they can approve you, and then you get access to the site. So the idea is there's thousands of volunteers at literally hundreds of locations across the country. We want to make it very inclusive. It is about connecting them, sharing best practices, sharing their thoughts and experiences. So we wanted that to be very inclusive. We take an example like Problem Gambling Institute of Ontario. This is part of the Centre for Addiction and Mental Health. We've done a number of different sites, much like Cadillac Fairview, for CAMH, this being one of them. Again, I can sign in and register on this site, go through that process. This one's actually pretty open. There's not an approval process. So I can create an account on here. We've got a CAPTCHA like we had on Heart and Stroke. I register now. I can immediately log into the site. I don't actually see anything more in the site, but what will happen is I'll be able to get parts of the site, and I can then self-identify and go through a second step process where I can say, well, I'm a treatment professional or I'm a researcher. I need access to this private area of the site, and they will approve that secondary request from there. Next one here, Transamerica Life Insurance. Again, we built their public-facing website on SharePoint 2010. This is a live site that we launched last fall, and its primary purpose is to engage with the advisors. So how do we get the advisors logging into the site, registering, and gaining access not just to an amazing SharePoint site, but to all the back-end systems. It's a single sign-on portal into all their financial and commission and reporting systems in the back end that those advisors can then access through there. So those are examples of a couple of different sites, and you can see each has their unique look and feel as part of that, and we do that through the master page branding updates on there. We can make it look like your particular site and bring that all together. The board of directors and complex, those are a little harder to show you examples of, but you get the concept there. We're running a little tight on time, so what I'd like to do now, just before we get into the pricing details, just want to put up our last poll on here, which is from a follow-up point of view. When would you like us to engage with you? Is this something that you immediately need to take action on, or just give you a little time over the next week or month or couple of months before we get back to you on that? So I can take another quick break here, leave that poll open for about another 45 seconds or so. If you could respond, that would be fantastic. Awesome. Thanks, everybody. So just from a pricing point of view, I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation that we license it by the farm. So it is an $8,000 license per production SharePoint farm. So that means whether you have one web front end or 10 web front ends, it's a single license around that. There's no limits on the number of web front ends that you have there. There is a 20% annual software assurance fee, so that provides you all product updates through the year. And Dev and QA farm license are included as part of that production farm license. So it's really a pay once license. You know, we have very few clients that have more than one production farm. It's typically just a single license from there. So I want to take a minute now and just, these are the links that are going to be in the presentation, but I want to take you through, whoops, where did I go here? Some Q&A that we've had going up on the site. Hang on a sec. Okay, so Wes and Rob have been doing a great job of answering questions, but I just want to repeat some of them so that the general audience can see that. So there was questions about SQL licensing for where the SharePoint database. Yeah, so from an extranet or from a public website point of view, you are going to want to get CPU or soon to be, or maybe now, I forget, they just changed to core licensing on SQL around that. So that's not about the Extranet User Manager, just around SharePoint itself. You do need to get that in place as well. Slides are going to be available. Rob's going to send the link out to everybody. There was a question about disabling an account if it hasn't been used in, say, 90 days. That's actually one of the reasons that some clients go Active Directory, is it does provide you richer controls around policy and audit. So you can set policies like if an account hasn't been logged in 90 days, expire that account. Now they can still use the forgotten password to re-enable that account. So it's still a self-service model, but it does ensure that, okay, if accounts aren't actively being used, deactivate those. And you can actually use that to generate some reports to see which accounts did you actually take out or do some other confirmation around that. Question about Office 365. Actually, there's a couple in here. If you're using Office 365 from a SharePoint point of view, there is a very different model. So our product doesn't work with 365. What happens there is you actually need to buy CAL licenses, so monthly licenses for your extranet users under Office 365. So it doesn't make sense for all workloads. In fact, there's no real model for hosting a public website on Office 365, so that members portal scenario would never exist there. But certainly from a collaboration point of view, if you had a smaller group of users and you're okay paying the monthly fee for each of those users to have an account, it is a reduced fee account. If you think about the regular SharePoint Online, that's sort of $4 and change a month for Office 365. I believe the Office 365 one is about half that, about $2 a month for an external user to be able to use that. Now the next question, more about Azure. You know, how do we integrate in with Azure from this point of view? There's actually some interesting announcements. I can get Rob to send a link out. There's going to be a webinar tomorrow afternoon from Scott Guthrie, who leads the Azure team in Redmond on Microsoft. There would be of particular interest if you're thinking about hosting public sites or extranets on SharePoint in an Azure kind of model. So I can't say anything more than that under NDA as an MVP, but certainly I would strongly encourage you to check that out because there's some interesting things going on there. There will be a video of the presentation as well. There is one from a past webinar up there right now too. So again, Rob will send the links out to that. Now, last question here from Kirk about SharePoint setup with Windows authentication. Internal users have no problems logging in. External users get a page can't be displayed after they enter their username and password. You know, I can't comment on why they're getting that. Certainly, if our product is properly installed, that situation shouldn't be happening. But there's something odd going on, it sounds like, in your SharePoint environment from that. A question about the user profile service. So there's a couple of ways to do that. If you're using Active Directory under the hood for your external users, certainly you can set up your user profile sync job in SharePoint to sync those external AD users as well. If you're using SQL under the hood, it's a little more complicated because you have to create a BCS connection for user profile to be able to pull those users in from that SQL repository. So I'm just going to turn it back over to Rob here will put his slide up. All his contact information is up on there, and we'll wrap things up from there.
Perfect. Thank you, Peter. That was great. I just want to thank everybody again for joining us on this call. I just want to let you know that that is my full contact information. Myself and also Envision IT as a company, we are on LinkedIn, so if you would like more information on us, you're more than welcome to check us out on LinkedIn. I did post a couple of links in chat in terms of the demo site and also the Windows Azure registration that's happening. If you would like, definitely check those two links out. Thank you again for joining us, and have a great day.